Hello, good morning. Good afternoon, rather. So first thing first, today is the quiz number one, which is 10% of final grade. Some of you have had some trouble accessing the quiz this morning, but that issue has been resolved. So you should be able to do the quiz anytime before the end of today. Okay. Now there is also like another notification, I guess, that says that the lab quiz is due today. The lab quiz is not due today. Okay, only quiz one is due. The lab quiz is going to be for later on, and it's going to be due on June 5th, which is 2 weeks from now. I'm not going to talk about the lab quiz for now, okay? Like we'll talk about it maybe later on, maybe later in the week or next week when we get closer to it. You do have access to it, but don't do the quiz, okay? Don't do the lab quiz. Do it when I've explained to you what it is about, okay? Some of you have access to the quiz, that's okay, okay? Don't worry about it. I'll reset it for you. The only thing you need to complete today is quiz number one, okay? All right, let's get to the class, the lesson. So last week we were talking about the lymphatic system, which is part of a system that helps drain the excess fluid that has been leaking out from the capillaries. And we know that part of the lymphatic system has an immune component to it. Okay, there are various lymphatic organs and structures that have white cells in them, and they will be screening the lymph that are coming in for pathogens. Right, so scattered throughout the body, like in the throat area here, or like in the armpit area or the groin area, there are these lymph nodes. Okay, and the lymph nodes are basically um, like a chamber, if you would, and there are multiple lymphatic vessels feeding into it. And inside these lymph nodes, there are clusters of white cells that are stationed there. And again, their job is just to screen the lymph that are coming in and detect if there is anything unusual that are being found in the lymph. And if they do detect something unusual, then the cells are going to divide, they're going to make more copies of themselves, and they're going to send signals in some cases to produce more white cells from the bone marrow, and the function is pretty much to clear out the infection as soon as possible. Besides the lymph nodes, we also have tonsils. Okay, so tonsils are a type of lymphatic tissues. It's not really an organ. Organs are like more specialized, right? Like if you think about the spleen, that's an organ. This is more just like a tissue. And there are three pairs of tonsils that are strategically located in the head. Okay, so we have one that is at the back of our nasal cavity, and that is called the adenoid tonsil. That's the one that gets infected when you have a cold. Right? So like it's really deep in, right? Like, if you think about the area immediately inside your nose, if you were to pick your nose, that's the area that you're going to be able to reach. When people do like a COVID swab, then they stick the thing like the Q-tip deep like that. But the tonsil is like really, really far back. You won't be able to reach it. So that is to help survey all the things that you breathe in, okay, and see if there's any pathogens in it. For things that enters through our mouth, we have two pair of tonsils to screen that. There's one at the back of the throat here. That is called the palatine tonsils. I'll show you a picture of that later. And if you press the tongue down, with the tongue depressor or popsicle stick, there is the lingual. Lingual means tongue, right? This means tongue. Tonsils, and then they will be there to screen for anything that we swallow that has pathogens in it. Of the three pairs, the only ones you can see in the mirror are basically the palatine tonsils. Okay, so like if you have like a throat infection or something. Sometimes if you look in the mirror and you say then you will see the tonsils are really swollen, orangey red, sometimes even with white dots in some cases, right? And that's a sign that you have an infection. Okay, the white cells in the tonsils are trying to fight the infection for you. So there it is. You cannot see the lingual one. Okay, like you gotta really pull the tongue out and press it down. It's like almost at the back right there. Like most people would have like a gag reflex if you're trying to reach that far back. So that is the tonsils. Okay, you just have to know the names, right? Like and the locations. Adenoid is at the back of the nose, the nasal cavity. The other two, it's like in the throat area, right? Okay, the spleen is behind the stomach. This is your diaphragm right here. Diaphragm, it's like the muscle that helps you breathe, right? Right beneath the diaphragm on the left side of your body, tucked in at the upper left quadrant, that is where you will find the spleen. It's the largest lymphatic organs. And again, much like the tonsils, much like the lymph nodes, there are white cells that are stationed in the spleen, and they will screen the lymph that's passing through. And we also know the spleen is responsible for breaking down what kind of blood cells? Do you remember? When these cells get too old and you need to get rid of them, they go to the spleen. What cell am I talking about? Does anybody know?
Red blood cells?
The red blood cells, exactly. The spleen also acts as a reservoir of blood. They kind of, hold on to a little bit of blood, not a lot. We're talking about like maybe 20 milliliter. And, in case you're losing blood, the spleen is able to supply that blood for you. It's not going to keep you going for too long if you are bleeding out excessively, but, it's better than nothing, right? A person can actually live without a spleen. It's called a splenectomy when you have to remove the spleen. And in terms of bodily functions, it would just make you more susceptible to infections. But otherwise, you are able to live a relatively normal life. Thymus. Okay, thymus is right. The thyroid is right here. The thymus is right here. Okay, don't confuse the two. Thyroid is the one that gets big if you don't have enough iodine, but the thymus is right here in front of the heart. It's not too big, and it actually shrinks when we get older. Now, what's really important about the thymus that ties into what we're learning today is that there are these cells called T cells. You might remember them from our note last class. There's B cells and there are T cells, right? The T cells, they are called T cells because they mature in the thymus. And only 5% will be able to leave the thymus. The T cells, they need to take a test, okay? It's called auto-reactivity test. And if they fail the test, they're destroyed. They're not allowed to come out. Right? We'll talk about how T cells are made, but basically, when you create a T cells, there is a chance, there's a high chance, in fact, that the T cell is going to recognize something inside your body as foreign. Okay, meaning they will mistaken your own cells as the enemy. We cannot allow those T cells to come out. We have to destroy them. Okay, so this is called auto-reactivity check. Okay, does the T cell react against your own cells? If it does, we have to destroy them. Only 5% will not react against your own cells, and they're able to come out from the thymus. Okay, if by mistake the autoreactive T cells do come out, then the person might have some kind of autoimmune diseases. Okay, where the white cells attack your own organs and stuff like that, right? So we'll talk about that in more detail in lecture 3. There is a hormone that's secreted from the thymus, and that's called thymosin. And it's just a hormone that encourages the growth of T cells. We'll learn more about hormones at the end of the course when we get to lecture 12. And that's it. Okay, there's not a lot of questions about these things. Just what we have on the slide is enough. And it is just a reoccurring theme, right? For these lymphatic structures, they are just organs and structures that help screen the body continuously for pathogens. Okay, if they found something that shouldn't be there, then they mount an immune response to get rid of it. So that's it for lecture 2. Okay. Any questions before we move on to number 3 today? Okay. Now, number 3 is I would say is the most complicated lesson of the unit. Okay. There's a lot of moving parts here, a lot of things we have to understand and remember. So please take extra good notes and do ask questions. I mean, it depends. Some people found the blood stuff confusing as well, especially when it comes to the pedigree and things like that. But in terms of information load, I think lecture 3 is the hardest. Okay. But after this is okay. 4 is easy. Right? So just hang in there. We're almost done the first unit. All right, lecture 3, immune system. Now, immune system is a little bit different from some of the other system that we talked about. When we talk about like the cardiovascular system, you can think of the organ like, the heart, the blood vessel is very physical, right? Like you can physically see the heart. When we talk about the respiratory system, you can visualize the lungs, right? And the diaphragm. When we talk about digestive system, you can think about the stomach, the intestine. It's very visual, very easy to think about those things in our head. But when we talk about immune system, it's kind of abstract for many people because there is no specific organs that are kind of related to the immune system. They are kind of these collection of cells, white cells that are inside the blood, and you can't really see them. Okay, so in that sense, is a bit abstract. But the purpose of the immune system is pretty obvious, I would say. Okay, its job is to defend the body against foreign invading organisms. Okay, the immune system protects our body from things that infects us, like bacteria, viruses, fungus, parasites, right? All these things can infect our body, and the immune system try to keep them out. But if they do come in, they try to, get rid of the pathogens as quickly as possible. Now, there are 2 kinds of immunity that we're gonna be looking at. I'm not sure how the time goes. I think we probably will only have time to go through innate immunity today, but we will wrap it up on Thursday for sure. So innate immunity is immunity that you are born with. You're born with. Okay. The moment the baby comes out of the mother's womb, it will have innate immunity ready to go. Right? It is inherited immunity. Okay? They get the immunity from the parents, genes. And it's good for defending the body against general infections. Okay, so it works towards a wide range of pathogens, and it doesn't change throughout a person's lifetime. We'll learn about the different strategies of innate immunity, but I'll give you an example. Fever. Fever is considered as a type of innate immunity. Right? A baby can have a fever. A 60-year-old, 70-year-old, 80-year-old person can also have a fever. There's no change in that mechanism throughout the person's lifetime. Okay, and fever is not designed to fight a specific infection. It's like a blanket strategy. It's good for a wide variety of protection. Okay, so that's innate immunity. Innate immunity is not enough. Okay? If a person only has innate immunity, they are actually very vulnerable. They could easily die from simple infection like a cold or like, the flu, right? For those kind of infection, innate immunity is not adequate. It's not enough. We need the other kind of immunity, which is adaptive immunity, or also known as acquired immunity. So first of all, adaptive means it's able to change, it's able to evolve over a person's lifetime, depending on what kind of pathogens they encounter. Okay, you and I, we have the same kind of innate immunity. Okay, my fever is as good as your fever. Okay, but when it comes to adaptive immunity, it might be slightly different depending on what you have encountered in your lifetime compared to what I have encountered. Okay, maybe you have gotten, I don't know, like hepatitis before, and then someone else have not, right? Then one person would have antibodies, would have protection against hepatitis, and the other will not. Okay, so like depending on what kind of illnesses you have had, what kind of infections you have had in your life, your adaptive immunity would be unique to your own experience. Also worth mentioning is that this kind of immunity is not something you are born with. You have to get it. That's why it's called acquired immunity. Okay, you have to be exposed to the pathogen first before you can get the immunity. Right. My favorite example is, I keep on telling you, right? Like chicken pox. You don't get immunity against chicken pox unless you get exposed to chicken pox first. Okay. Or nowadays you can get vaccinated for chickenpox, right? So you can get immunity through that way as well. So there are different kinds of ways you can protect yourself by creating immunity. Some are natural, some are not so natural, and we're going to talk about these different categories towards the end of the course, of the lesson, of the lecture. All right, but for now, innate and adaptive. Any questions? Does that make sense? All right, fantastic. So here is a list of different mechanisms, different ways that the innate immunity works. We're going to talk about each one of them in greater detail. So I already, briefly give you an example, as like fever as an example, right? For adaptive immunity, it uses different strategies. It involves producing the T cells that we just learned from the thymus, and then the B cells that we learned from last class, right? B cells, they are the ones that produce antibodies, right? But exactly how to activate them, how to create them, we're gonna have to, take a big note to explain that. But today, I think we'll be focusing on just these 5 things. Okay. So, innate immunity. First strategy, first mechanism in the innate immunity is physical barriers. The best way to keep things out of the body is to not let them in, right? Okay, so you have intact skin. Skin, when it's continuous, when there's no breaks in it, it's a pretty effective barrier to keep things out. Okay, we call it a physical barrier because it's like physically there, right? But we cannot have skin covering our entire body. There are some parts that are just not functionally is not possible to put skin over, like your eyes. Okay, like we have the eyelids, but then when you open your eyes, you can't have skin on it, right? Because it will block the light from coming in. So instead of that, we have what's called like a mucous membrane. Okay, mucous membrane, and these kind of mucous membrane are also found in the respiratory tract, in digestive tract, reproductive, and urinary tracts. Now, you have to think of the body as like an exposed surface. Clearly, like the skin is exposed. We understand that, right? Like all these parts are outside and it's touching the air. We understand that those are exposed surface. But like the stuff that's inside the body are actually exposed as well. Like if you think about, the toilet paper roll here, right? Like if this is the mouth and then this is like the anus, the entire tube that goes from the mouth to the anus, your GI tract, what we call it, that actually is an exposed surface, is exposed to the outside, right, to the food that we eat, right? So everything inside here, like where my finger is touching, everything like, where's the camera? Everything that I'm touching right here, even though it's inside our body, it's also considered as an exposed surface. So we need to have mucous membrane to protect them. Same thing with our airway, urinary tract, right? Skin is not possible in those locations. So instead we have the mucous membrane. In some places, we have ciliated cells, cells with little hair to help move things like trapped particles or trapped pathogens. And in this case, if it's in our respiratory tract, we can move them up to our throat and we can spit them out or swallow them, right? So these are physical barriers. Another kind of physical barrier that people don't really think about is called normal floras. Normal floras. So normal floras are microorganisms that lives on us or in us. Okay? On the skin, for example, there are a lot of good microorganisms that lives on it. And in our intestinal tract, there are also quite a bit of bacteria living in it. There are more normal floras living in and on us than the total number of cells that we have in our body. So we have a really close mutualistic relationship with them. Okay, we give them a place to live, and in turns, they offer us some kind of protection. So what kind of protection do they give us? Well, it turns out these normal floras, they take up so much space that it makes it impossible, in most cases, for the dangerous pathogens to attach to our surface. Okay, you have a lot of good bacteria living in your intestinal tract that there's no space for the bad one to attach onto it. Okay, if they do attach, then they could cause upset stomach and diarrhea and things like that, right? But for the most part, they cannot attach because the good ones, the normal flora, take up so much space, right? Sometimes, though, it's possible for them to penetrate the skin and cause some kind of localized infection. So over here, we have some common normal floras, and sometimes we name the bacteria based on what kind of problem they cause, right? So this one here, the Propionibacterium acnes, they cause acne. Okay, so like if you have acne on the face or even on somewhere else on the skin, it's because they have breached the skin and cause a local infection. But most of the time, they give us some kind of protection as part of the physical barriers. How do we get more normal floras? Like sometimes if you take antibiotics, right? If you read the I guess they don't really give those out anymore, but a lot of times they tell you if you take the antibiotics, one of the side effects is like you might have a little bit of an upset stomach, right? That's because the antibiotics kill the normal flora in your intestinal tract. Right? The antibiotic doesn't distinguish between good bacteria and bad bacteria, right? So now that your normal flora has been reduced in your gut, right, gives you a little bit of an upset stomach. So what can you do? What do people take to increase the good bacteria in the system again? Anybody know what I'm talking about?
Probiotics.
That's right, the probiotics, right? So you can buy probiotics as like little drops. One drop contains like billions of bacteria, some of the product claims. But you can naturally get them from yogurt and things like that. Okay, a lot of yogurt has probiotics in them. Good bacteria, normal flora. All right. Okay, besides physical barrier, we also have chemical barriers. And chemical barriers include things like lysozyme. They are specialized antibacterial enzymes that are found in tears, sweat, and saliva. Okay, and it helps cleanse the surface of the eye when we blink. Sweating, kind of cleanse the skin in a way, and the saliva constantly cleanse the mouth to keep the bacterial population under control. Another example of chemical barriers is that we have low pH in the stomach. Right? The pH in stomach is about 1.5. Okay, about 1.5, ranging from 1 to 2. And that's really, really acidic. It's able to break down most of the food that we eat and control the bacteria growth. Like it will kill off most of the bacteria. But there is one that is particularly of concern. It has evolved to kind of hide itself from the stomach acid. It's quite common for many people. Does anybody know what I'm talking about? A specific bacteria that lives in the stomach, and it causes stomach pain and ulcers in some cases. Anybody heard of it before? Okay, so there's something called H. pylori. You might want to look that up. You're gonna learn later, anyways, in the digestive system. But it's a particularly vicious bacteria. It's able to hide itself in the stomach lining, protect itself from the stomach and from the stomach acid, and cause ulcers. The pH is also low in the vagina to help again maintain like the normal flora, so that things like bacteria and fungus are not going to be able to grow there. So chemical barriers, we have the lysozyme, and we have the low pH in various parts of the body. All right, that's enough talking. Let's take a quick note on the second mechanism, okay, which is inflammation. Now, when we talk about these kind of mechanisms, it's important for you to think about the purpose of each mechanism. Like, why are we doing it, right? So the first one is relatively easy. The first one is a physical barrier and chemical barriers. The purpose of having these barriers is to keep things out of the body, okay? Prevent them from attaching to the body and prevent them from entering the body. Okay? So that's the first mechanism. Now, second mechanism is inflammation. Right? So what's the purpose of inflammation? Right? The purpose of inflammation is to recruit more WBCs, white blood cells, and plasma protein to the injured or infected area. Okay, so like if you have a cut and you introduce some bacteria into the cut, right? It's inevitable. If you cut your hand, things are going to go in because there's a breach in the skin now. There's a breach in the physical barrier now, right? So things are going to be coming in. So the inflammation is going to help recruit more white cells and plasma proteins to the injured site. Right? So let's explain what happens. Now there is a kind of cells that we have not talked about yet. It's called mast cells. Okay? So these are similar to another cell that we have learned. Which cell plays a role in inflammation? Do you remember from last class? It's one of those granulocytes that we talked about. Maybe you can quickly take a look at your notes from last class and tell me what cells play a role in inflammation. Starts with a B, huh? Anybody?
Basophil?
That's right. So the basophil plays a role in inflammation. So mast cell is similar to basophil. Okay, similar to basophil, but these are, as in the mast cells, are anchored to tissue. Whereas the basophil moves around in the body. Okay, the mast cells are stuck at the tissue. Okay? So when there is an injury, when there's an injury, the mast cells will release. Okay? Mast cells release a chemical called histamine. In response to tissue damage. Histamine has two effects on blood vessels. Now remember, the purpose is try to get more white cells and plasma protein to the injured site. So how do you do that? Well, histamine is going to do vasodilation. Okay? It makes the blood vessels bigger. And when they get bigger, you are able to increase blood flow. Right? So more blood flow means more white cells can come and more plasma protein can come, right? And plasma protein to the site. So that is the first effect. Now, it's not enough to bring more white cells and more protein to the site of location, the site of infection. You need to allow them to exit the blood vessels, right? So even though the capillaries on its own is leaky, but under the effects of histamine, it's going to get extra leaky. So the second effect of histamine is that it will increase permeability. Right? So it makes the vessels extra leaky. And when it's extra leaky, it allows WBC and plasma protein to leave the blood vessels and enter tissue. All right, so what are the side effects? Let's talk about the first one first. Vasodilation. You increase the blood flow. With more blood coming in, the area is going to look red. So redness and it's gonna feel warm. So remember, like last time you cut yourself or something, the cut is gonna it's gonna look red for sure, and then you feel heat. That's because of the vasodilation. Okay. And then for the second one, for the increased permeability, it's not just the white cells that's leaking out. It's not just the proteins that's leaking out. There's going to be a lot of fluid that's going to be leaking out as well. And that leads to swelling. Okay. And the build up, remember we drew a picture last time, right? Let me quickly show you. Right here. Right, so you're going to have like extra fluid leaking out. Right, like really filling up this space here, right? Like extra fluid leaking out. Okay, and in the tissue, you're going to have nerve endings. Okay? You're going to have nerve endings there. And with extra fluid kind of pushing on the nerve endings, it leads to pain. Okay. So these here, these are actually called the hallmarks. Hallmarks of inflammation. Like, how do you know if someone is having inflammation? You check for these 4 signs. So that's it. Right? So these are unintended consequences, but the point of the inflammation is to bring more white cells and more plasma protein to the site of infections. The white cells will help clear the infection, hopefully, and then the protein will help with the repairing process, right? So we have proteins like fibrinogen. We have proteins like prothrombin that will help stop the bleeding if there are any. There are also antibodies in the plasma that can help fight the infection. Okay.
So this histamine, is it like it's an enzyme or is it a protein?
It's a chemical. Yeah, it's a chemical. Yeah, it's not really, yeah. An enzyme, they're gonna have to play a role in a chemical reaction, right? But that's not what it does, right? So this is like yeah, it's like a chemical that does these 2 things.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah. What kind of drugs do people take to block histamine? Do you know, or anyone?
Antihistamine?
Yeah, antihistamine. What kind of drugs contain antihistamine? Like now, this particular months of the year, people usually take them. What kind of
Benadryl.
Yeah, like allergy drugs, right? Like Benadryl, Claritin, that kind of stuff, right? Okay, the antihistamine helps with the allergy symptoms that you have. Watery eyes, runny nose, that kind of stuff.
So means that when we use like antihistamine, because histamine, as you said, has so many tasks for body. So we block that one, and the task is not gonna happen, right?
Yeah, so like what happens during an allergy is like you have an over secretion of a histamine like throughout the entire body. This is more like a localized type of response. So when you take the antihistamine, you are just targeting the systemic secretion of histamine. It doesn't really affect the localized mechanism too much. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so that would be more like basophils, right? That's playing the role. But when it comes to localized injury, that's more like mast cells.
Vincent, so these things in blue, the side effects are what we can see as like on the sites.
That's right. So like if you have let's say you have a finger that that's a little bit red and hurting, okay, and you go to see a doctor, and the doctor is gonna determine like what's wrong with it, right? Like, did you cut it? And you're like, no, I didn't cut it, right? And then they would have to look, oh, like it looks red, does it feel warm? They're gonna ask you, right? It looks a bit swollen and it hurts. Then they could say, oh, okay, there might be an inflammation going on, and then they would like
inside the body, like inside.
Oh, like how do you know someone having inflammation like inside the body?
does that also happen, like, when this is histamine thing, secretes?
Say that one more time.
Okay, so I mean, when the histamine, like when it's being released on the blood vessels, like does it also happen inside, like, like in one of my, let's say in my arm inside, not outside?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, like organs can definitely have a little bit of inflammation. It's not just restricted to surface stuff, right? So like we talked about this before, right? Remember I said anything that ends with itis, then it's
Yep.
inflammation, right? So like a person can have like hepatitis, that's inflammation of the liver, right? A person can have like, pericarditis, right? So all these things is the same. The structure that's being affected is gonna have these kind of characteristics associated with it. Now, can you always see it like with your naked eye? Obviously not. Like if it's inside the body, then you have to do other testings, right? Maybe it's gonna show up on like a scan or something, but these are the things that they are looking for. Okay. And there are also blood tests that they could do to see if your like basophil is elevated. There are some kind of plasma protein that will also be elevated when a person is having inflammation. So there are lots of stuff to look at. These characteristics is more for like outside kind of inflammation. Okay, like the finger, right? Even if you haven't cut your finger, it can still be infected because people sometimes have really dry hands and then there are like microscopic cracks, like especially around the fingernails and stuff like that. Then bacteria can go in and cause inflammation, right? I don't know if that answers your question. But here is a picture of the mast cells. The arrows are pointing at the mast cells, and this is a blood vessels. And they're very localized type of activity. The histamine will only affect this blood vessels. We don't want the histamine to be very systemic in most cases. Okay. If you have a lot of histamines released all at once throughout the entire body, then that could lead to a very dangerous situation, which we'll talk about towards the end of the lesson. But to give you an idea, it would be like people with severe allergies to like nuts, right? Or to like penicillin, right? Their whole body goes into inflammation mode, and it could be life-threatening. What do we give to people? If they're suffering from these kind of life-threatening allergies, say like a reaction to like peanuts or something. Like, how do we save the person? What do they must have, like at school, right? In case one of the kids have one of these episodes, what do we give them?
EpiPen?
That's right, the EpiPen. What is the epi in EpiPen? Do you know?
Epinephrine.
Yeah, EpiPen. Epi is epinephrine, which actually is the same word as adrenaline, right? So it will counteract the effect of histamine. Okay. Anyway, so we will talk about all these things, but now we're just learning about innate immunity, things that our body does to keep things out. So that's the physical barrier and the chemical barrier. But if they fail to keep things out, when I say things, I mean like bacteria and viruses. When they're inside the body, the next best thing we can do is to have an inflammation, try to contain them, try to get rid of them before they spread. Okay. So here is again like just more mast cells here with the granules to secrete the histamine. Okay, quick poll. These should be very easy for you. Go ahead. Okay, for the interest of time, I'm gonna end the poll there. Which of the following is an example of physical barrier? It will be the ciliated cells. Okay, tears and lysozyme, like it's some kind of secretion, right? If it's a secretion, then it's a chemical barrier. Okay, a physical barrier is something that's like already there. Okay, here's another one. Please read the question carefully. Okay, the answer is localized swelling, right? The swelling is caused by the vasodilation and sorry, it's caused by the increase in permeability, right? With all the fluid leaking out, the tissue is going to be swelling. B is not correct, okay, because the white cells is going from the bloodstream to the tissue. It's the other way around. Fever is not caused by histamine, okay? Fever is caused by something else, as we'll learn. And it's also not reduced blood flow. It's supposed to be increased blood flow, right? Because the vessels got bigger. So the answer is A. All right, next we are gonna have another mechanism. Okay, it's phagocytosis. Okay, so phagocytosis is a type of endocytosis. You may remember from last semester, where a cell, eats something up, brings in some kind of solid. So in this case, if a cell is able to, if a white cell is able to do phagocytosis, we call it a phagocyte. Okay? A phagocyte, again, it's a white cells that can perform phagocytosis. And there are only two examples that we're going to look at. One of them is called neutrophils, which you know already. It's the most common type of white cells, right? 70% of your white blood cells are neutrophils. They are also granulocytes, right? So it's important to understand when we, classify a white cells. There are more than one way to classify them. Okay, you can classify them based on what they look like under the microscope. So that's what the granulocytes and the agranulocyte category is about. Like, are you able to see their granules? If you can see them, then they are granulocytes. If you cannot see them, then they're agranulocytes, right? But you can also classify the white cells based on what they do. So if they're able to do phagocytosis, then we call them a phagocyte, right? So you can do it from like a functional perspective, or you can do it based on an appearance, right? So neutrophils and macrophages, they are both phagocytes. Over here, the blue is actually a phagocyte, and the yellow, it's something that they're trying to eat, and you can see the cell membrane kind of wraps around the target, and eventually is going to bring it into the cell. That's basically what phagocytosis does. Now, how do they know what to eat, right? I think someone asked last class, like, how do you distinguish what belongs to the body and what does not? Well, when it comes to innate immunity, the phagocytes, they engulf anything that has PAMs on them. Okay, so PAMs is an acronym. It stands for pathogen associated molecular pattern. okay, or PAMP, PAMPs. Okay, they are just clusters of molecules that are found on the surface of pathogens, and our cells are trained to recognize them. Okay, it is in our DNA that we are able to recognize these PAMPs, these molecular patterns. As soon as we see them on a cell, we know it doesn't belong to the body, and the white cells are gonna go after them and eat them up. Okay, that's what PAMs are. All right. So just to clarify, PAMs, they are found on the pathogens, pathogen associated, right? They are found. Yeah.
Pathogens are like the bad things we ingest, right?
Yeah, so pathogens are bacteria, viruses, fungus, parasites. Those are pathogens. They have to be some kind of live organism, right? Okay. Not everything that makes us ill or makes us sick is pathogens. For example, cancer is not pathogen. Okay, cancer arises from our own body, right? Or like if you have some kind of like mercury poisoning, right? That makes us sick, but mercury is not alive, so that's not a pathogen. Okay, pathogen has to be some kind of like living organism. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, yeah. So macrophage, which is another kind of phagocytes, they can release what's called colony stimulating factors to increase white cell production in the bone marrow. Basically, when the immune system is a little bit overwhelmed, let's say, like in the case of an infection, there are too many bacteria coming in, and the macrophage is having a hard time eating all of it, they will call for reinforcement. They will call for backup, right? And the way they do it is through these chemical signals called colony stimulating factors. Okay? It goes to the bone marrow. That's where the new blood cells are created, right? Remember the hematopoiesis, that word, right? So under the influence of colony stimulating factor, you will make more white cells. White cells will come and help you clear the infection. All right? As the infection is being overcome, some phagocytes will die. They fight until they die. They just keep eating and eating. One phagocyte can eat like as many as like hundreds of bacteria. And along with the dead phagocytes, there are going to be some dead tissue cells, some dead bacteria, and possibly some live bacteria all mixed in there. And they sometimes form this pus. Right? I'm sure we all know what pus looks like. It's this whitish, yellowish liquid that sometimes ooze out of your wound. That's a sign that the infection it's being cleared by your white cells. There's some kind of fighting going on. And because it potentially contains live bacteria, it's considered as like an infectious bodily fluid. Okay, so like you should always wear gloves when handling someone's wound, usually it's a good sign that it's being fall off. Okay, the infection, but sometimes the pus can build up in the body and it's not able to drain. Then that could cause a problem. Okay. And then you might have to go to the doctor, and then they will drain the pus for you. That could happen when someone like removed their wisdom teeth. Okay, that happened to someone I know. The wound was not healing properly. The person didn't take the antibiotics as prescribed, and then the infection start to get worse and worse and worse. And then there's like a bunch of pus filled up in the cheek area here. Okay, and then they have to drain it. Otherwise, the pus is gonna spread, say, to the brain, and that could cause problem. But a little bit of pus, okay, it's not a big deal. It just means that it's
Vincent, this pus, so when somebody gets like lung infection and like coughing, is that the one
Oh,
that
no.
produces in lung?
No, so like that's the phlegm that you're talking about, I think, right? The pus is like this whitish stuff. That yeah, whitish, sometimes clear, yellowish. You know, sometimes people get pimple, right? And then it's filled with pus. It's this whitish.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, okay. Okay, this is a really good slide because it covers everything that we talked about. So I'm just gonna highlight a few things for you, right? So here we have the cells, tissue cells, and then my favorite kind of injury, right, to draw, the splinter coming in, and along with the splinter, all these green little jelly bean looking things, those are the bacteria. Right. So what happens when you have bacteria in the system? Well, you've breached. They have breached the physical barrier. So now we gotta try to get rid of them. So what are some of the immediate effects when the physical barrier is breached? We need to have inflammation, right? So we got the mast cells right here. It's gonna be releasing the histamine, and the histamine will do two things to your blood vessels. Okay, number one, vasodilation makes it bigger. Number two, makes it more leaky, right? So all these white cells that are coming in, they are able to exit. You can see this here is the inside of the blood vessels. And when the white cells come, they will squeeze themselves out of the blood vessels and into the tissue. Once they're in the tissue, they will start to eat up the bacteria, right? Through phagocytosis. And there are two kinds of phagocytes, right? There are neutrophils, and then there are macrophage. I don't know if you remember, but last class, when we took a note, under agranulocytes, if you still have the table with you, right? Look at the right side when we wrote down agranulocytes. We have cells that are called monocytes, right? So the monocytes are the inactive version of the phagocyte of the macrophage. So once the monocytes squeeze themselves out, they transform, right? They become the aggressive, the activated macrophage, which quickly eats up all the bacteria. But sometimes your immune system is being overwhelmed. There's like too much bacteria coming in. Then the macrophage can secrete the colony stimulating factor. Okay, where does the colony stimulating factor go? Goes where? We just talked about earlier. I'm just checking to see if you remember. Goes to the where?
The bone marrow.
That's right. Goes to the bone marrow to stimulate, to increase WBC production. It's like, hey, we're being overwhelmed here. Okay, we don't have enough. Make more. All right, so your bone marrow is gonna increase its production of white cells, send them to the site of infection, and then hopefully you're gonna get better.
When these histamines vasodilate and expand the blood vessel. Yes, are the white blood cells around waiting to come in, or where do the white blood cells like were they hanging around waiting to come into the blood vessels?
Oh, the white blood cells are in the blood, right?
Yes.
Remember the blood has the plasma and then the formed elements, right?
Yeah.
At the bottom, yeah. So the formed elements include the white cells.
Yes, I know.
Yeah. So they come along with the blood, and then now they squeeze themselves out to go into the tissue because that's where the infection is, right?
Okay.
Yeah. It's really bad when the infection goes into the blood. Okay, that's like super dangerous. Okay, so most of the time, the infection from something like a splinter, for example, the infection is just in the tissue. Okay, like once an infection goes into the blood, we call that bacteremia or sepsis in some cases, and that could spread throughout the body very quickly. Person could die. Okay, very quickly. Okay,
so
you guys.
You talked about, those are the epithelial tissues we talked about, right? Like
these guys?
Yeah, these guys.
Yeah, that's right. Those are just the tissue, right? Under the skin or something, right?
Okay.
Yeah. Any of you who have kids might have heard of strep A infection, right? It's recently like a really concerning things for parents. because it's not just strep throat. A person can get strep A infection through like cuts and stuff like that, and the kid could be fine for some time, and then all of a sudden gets really, really, really bad. Okay, like fall off a cliff. They describe it as if, right? And then they could die if we don't treat it properly, because the strep A can cause the sepsis, the bacteremia goes into the bloodstream and spread all over the body. Okay, so like I said, most of them is just supposed to be in the tissue. All right, so that is a very
So Vincent, sorry, I'm
no worries.
interrupting you. So like in that strep
Strep A,
A,
yeah.
if it goes to the vessels, so white blood cells don't like eat them in the blood,
It's
or
more
they have
difficult to attack them while they're in the blood, because once it's in the blood, they move really, really fast, right? So, as a loose analogy, okay, it's like if you're driving on the highway and you try to catch something like a bug or something, right? Like even though you're both moving, but like it's really hard to get them because you're both moving at high speed, right? Maybe that's not a good analogy, but the point is, or like if you think about like in a river, like you're in a boat and then you are moving really fast, and then you drop something in the river, you're trying to pick it up. Both of you are moving very fast and maybe in different directions. It's really hard to get them, right? So it's the same for the white cells. It's hard for them to like attach to them, to latch onto them and eat them up when they're already
got
in
it. Thank you.
Yeah. And sometimes like once it's in the blood, it could spread all over the body really quickly, right? And that's another dangerous part related to it. So this is a really good slide, right? It summarizes everything we've talked about up to this point. Make sure you spend some time to look at it. Some people ask me what is this yellow thing here? That's your nerve endings. Okay, and again, why is it in this picture? Well, because the histamine makes the capillary leaky. All these extra things coming out will be pushing on the nerve endings, and that's why it will hurt. Okay, and it's a very distinctive kind of pain for inflammation. People usually describe it as a throbbing pain, right? And you probably had this experience if you ever cut your finger. Like you can feel it pulsating, right? That's the kind of pain associated with inflammation. Okay, moving on. Another kind of cells that plays an important role in innate immunity is something called the natural killer cell, or NK cell for short. Okay? Natural killer cell. That's the actual name of the cells. Okay, and their job, their function is to kill virus-infected cells, and in some cases with limited capacity, they are able to kill tumor cells. Okay, so just a quick refresher on how viruses work. I mean, we talked about it last semester when we learned the Hershey and Chase experiment with the bacteriophages. But just very quickly, a virus, like a bacteriophage, but all kinds of viruses similar to this, they will land on a whole cells. Okay, in this example, we have a bacteria cell, but it's the same case for your cells, okay, and my cells. When a virus lands on a cell, they will inject its DNA, and then the DNA will hijack the cell's machinery, the ribosomes and the transcription translation machinery, and it will use the cell's resources to make virus parts. Once you make enough virus parts in the cell, the viruses will assemble inside the cell and it will burst open, and then you have all these new viruses coming out that will go infect other viruses. Okay, when a cell is infected with a virus, it will put distress signals on its surface. Okay, these distress signal on the surface. Right? It'll be like, hey, I am infected with a virus. Please destroy me before all these, new viruses burst out from me. Okay, it's like a zombie movie, right? When a person gets infected, they're like, oh, I'm gonna turn, right? So like, please kill me before I turn into a zombie. Essentially, that's what your cell is doing. And that's the job of the natural killer cell. the NK cell will come and will eat the infected cells. It will destroy them. Not eat it, sorry, it will destroy them. And then you know, the virus cannot assemble anymore. Okay, so if it's fast enough, it's able to prevent a virus infection. Okay, so in this picture, we see the yellow ones are the NK cells, the natural killer cells, and the red one here, you just have to believe me, that is a tumor cell, right? And it's able to kill it. Now, this is the kind of things that when it works, we don't really think much about it. Okay? Every day, the NK cells goes around our body, and it's able to basically prevent cancer from happening by killing these tumor cells. Cancer, as you learned from me last semester, they are basically cells that has been mutated, right? Because of, you know, things like tumor suppressor genes and oncogenes being mutated in the cell, and they go through uncontrolled cell division. But these natural killer cells can identify them at an early stage and kill them off, right? If it's working, we will never know about it. Okay, we stay healthy. But once they are no longer working at a sufficient level, then the cancer cell, the tumor cells, you know, is able to grow, and the person will get ill, right? So that's the NK cells.
So Vincent, this NK cells is kind of a white blood cell, or
Yep. So NK cells are white cells. All these are white cells. All right. So we have the barriers, physical, chemical. All right. If they breach them and come in, we have to do inflammation, or we rely on the phagocytes, like the neutrophils and the macrophage, to eat them up. All right. If the virus gets as far as infecting our cells, then we have the NK cells to protect us. And sometimes if our own body cells turns malfunction, then we also rely on the NK cells to identify them and to nip them up. All right, another kind of strategy is what we call complement proteins. Complement proteins, they are always in the plasma. They are already there. Okay? Even if you don't have an infection, they are already in the plasma. And like many plasma proteins, the complement proteins are made by the liver. Okay? When you are not fighting a pathogen, these proteins are mostly inactive. You don't turn them on. You just keep them in the off mode, but they do circulate throughout the body. When you do have an infection, you will turn on the complements through a series of chemical reactions. We are not new to this idea. I already showed you that's the same thing that's going on with the blood clots, right? You know, one thing leads to the activation of the next. In the case of complement protein, it's just more complicated. Okay, you know, we have all these complement proteins named, you know, C1q, C1r, so on and so forth. You don't have to memorize any of it. But the point is, like, if I activate these three, then that would activate C4, which then activates C2. And then, you know, one thing leads to the next. Like domino effects, you will activate these complement proteins. The main functions of the complement proteins is to synergize and other non-specific defense. Synergy means two things working together to get even better. Okay, so for example, like just as an example, like you can get 85% on an assignment. Okay, I can get like, you know, 82 on my assignment. That's like the best we can do. But if we work together as a team, we are able to get like 92%. We synergize each other. We are able to achieve even better results that either of us can do by ourselves alone. Okay, that's what complement proteins does. Okay, they synergize with other non-specific defense. They make it even better. So I'm gonna give you some examples. Okay, 2 examples to help you understand how complement proteins synergize with other non-specific defense. Non-specific defense are the ones that we were talking about, the innate response, okay? Non-specific defense is equal to innate immunity. Okay, they are called non-specific because they are not designed to fight a specific pathogen. They're not designed to fight, say, chickenpox specifically. It's just blanket protection, right? All right. So first function of complement is they are able to recruit more white blood cells. That is the function of inflammation, right? If you remember, the purpose of inflammation is to recruit more white cells. Well, with the help of complement proteins, we can do it even better. So think about it. The body is so big, right? How does the white cell know where to go? How does the white cell know where the infection is? Okay, let's say the macrophage call for backup, right? It sends out these colony stimulating factors that goes to the bone marrow. Now the bone marrow makes more white cells. So the newly created white cells came out of the bone marrow. How does it know where to go, right? So that's where complement proteins is going to come in. Complement proteins is going to leave behind a trail of chemical signals. Okay, like here shown here in this picture, a trail of chemical signals for the white cells to follow. It's like that stories, right? Hansel and Gretel, right? I don't know if you ever read that story, but it's about two siblings going into the forest, but worry they're not going to be able to find their way back. They leave little trails of breadcrumbs for them to follow, right? So these complement proteins are the breadcrumbs. Okay, the white cells will follow the trail, will follow the breadcrumbs to the site of infection. They are attracted to these complement proteins. So this makes the recruitment of white cells more effective, more efficient. Second function that we're going to talk about that relates to like synergy is coating the target cells. Let's say the white blood cells is able to follow the chemical trail to the site of infection. It squeezes itself out of the blood vessels and into the tissue. There are so many cells here. How do I know which one to eat? Okay, sure, it can check for PAMs one by one, but that's like a slow process, right? Okay, so what complement protein does is it will code the target cell. It basically put a sticker on them and say, please eat. And then the white cells will be able to find them much quicker. And it would, do phagocytosis on them. Okay, and antibodies will also work in a similar fashion. It's able to tag them because of the complement protein. It's like this game. I don't know if you guys have seen this before. It's called Finding Waldo. It's a very common thing for kids to do. In this picture, somewhere there is this character here named Waldo, and you're supposed to find it. And that's what the white cells is like. The white cells get to the site of infection. They see all these characters, but like, how do I know which one am I supposed to eat? Okay, so you will find them if you look close enough. If you spend enough time, you will eventually find the target. But what complement does is basically put a tag, put like a glow around the target. It's like, hey, this is the guy. This is the one you have to eat. Come over here, right? So it makes the process much faster. The white cells will be able to identify what they're supposed to phagocytize quickly. Okay. So
I have a question, Professor.
yeah, go ahead.
Who identify for white blood cells? Is that the complementary? For
Who
example,
identify
who's coding? Yeah.
Who's
Who
tagging
is
it? Yeah, the
coding?
complement.
Yeah,
Yeah, the complement
complement.
protein.
Okay.
That's right. Okay. So they will coat it and it will make it easier to see. Okay. The last function of complement is the last two examples, right? The chemical trail and then the tagging. Those are for those are for enhancing other immune response, right? But this last example, it's more for attacking, okay, rather than support. So they form something called a membrane attack complexes, or MAC, which punch holes into the bacterial cell wall. Once you have holes in the bacteria leaks and die. Right? So not only does complement make other immune defense better, but it's also capable of mounting an attack on its own. Okay, so quickly, just some polls here. Go ahead. Okay, well, I know it's a lot of information for you to take in, and you have the quiz to worry about. So maybe that's why you guys are not getting the right answer. I mean, some of you get the right answer, but the PAMP, the P stands for pathogens, right? So pathogen-associated molecular patterns, they are found on the pathogens. Okay, because there are very low participation rate, I'm not going to launch the poll. I'm just going to take up these questions with you. That's probably more effective. These cells are involved in innate immunity, and a person lacking these cells may have a higher than normal chance of developing malignant tumors. Malignant tumors are cancer, right? So if you are missing one of these cells, it's going to increase the chance of tumor. What cell is that?
NK?
That's right. The
NK
NK.
cells.
That's it. NK cells, because they kill tumor cells, right? Membrane attack complexes are formed by complement proteins. They leave chemical trails, they tag the pathogens, and they're able to put holes in them to kill them. Okay, last mechanism for today, and then we're going to wrap up, is fever. Okay? You don't always get a fever when you have an infection, but when you have a fever, you probably have an infection. Okay, so fever is a temporary rise above normal body temperature, which is 30 degrees Celsius or 98.6 Fahrenheit. And there is a chemical that's responsible for triggering the fever. It's called prostaglandins. Okay, and there is a part of the brain that helps set the temperature for the body, and you will learn about that in the brain lessons. But for now, that part of the brain is called a hypothalamus. Hypothalamus. Okay, it's called a master gland. A lot of things that happens automatically in the body is controlled by the hypothalamus. So when the body releases prostaglandins, it will go to the hypothalamus and trigger the fever. So that's where the hypothalamus is. It's a very tiny part in the brain. What is the purpose of fever? Well, fever will help make the immune response better by basically like pressing the fast forward button, if you would. It increases the enzymatic activity, right? So you can activate a complement faster. You can have more lysozyme produced. It speeds up metabolism to help with the healing process and tissue repairing, as well as phagocytic activity. And another obvious protection that's not listed here is higher temperature is going to slow down bacterial growth in some cases, right? And virus growth. So you want to slow down the activity of the enemy while speeding up your own cells activity, right? And hopefully that way you can clear the infection much faster. And that's it for innate immunity. Okay, so I don't want to, go too long for today because I know you have the quiz to prepare for. So that's all we're gonna do. Okay, but on Thursday we are gonna have the full class. We'll finish lecture 3, and I'll also talk about the lab quiz that you have to do. All right. Good luck with the quiz, and see you on Thursday.
Professor, I have to say something. Can I stay after?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yep. No problem. Okay. The rest of you, see you later.